The door chime jingled softly as James Carter stepped into the Golden Brew coffee shop on a crisp Chicago morning in March 2025. He tugged the hood of his worn gray hoodie a little lower over his brow, blending into the crowd like any other guy looking for a quick caffeine fix. To the untrained eye, he was just a regular customer, 55 years old, a little gray at the temples, hands stuffed in his pockets. But James wasn't regular. He was the black CEO who'd built Golden Brew from a single storefront into a citywide chain, a man whose name was whispered with respect in boardrooms and coffee shops alike. Today, though, he wasn't here as the boss. He was here to see the truth. The place was buzzing. The rich aroma of roasted beans hung thick in the air, mingling with the chatter of customers, some tapping away on laptops, others waiting in a line that snaked toward the counter. James took it all in, a faint smile tugging at his lips. This was his dream in motion, a place where anyone could walk in, feel welcome, and leave with a good cup of coffee. He'd spent 30 years making sure every detail, from the warm wood decor to the handwritten chalkboard menu, screamed hospitality. But lately, he'd been hearing whispers, complaints online, rumors from regulars. Were his people still living up to the Golden Brew promise? There was only one way to find out. He shuffled into line, hands still in his pockets, eyes scanning the scene. That's when he noticed her, a blonde barista behind the counter, maybe 30, with a name tag that read Debbie Miller. She wasn't hustling like the others. No, Debbie was propped against the register, one elbow on the counter, scrolling through her phone like she had all the time in the world. The line grew longer, and a few customers ahead of James shifted impatiently, but Debbie didn't budge. James raised an eyebrow. Okay, he thought. Maybe she's just taking a quick break. When the line finally thinned, he stepped up, offering his warmest smile, the one that had disarmed investors and charmed suppliers for decades. Excuse me, he said, voice smooth and polite. Can I get some help here? Debbie barely glanced up. Her eyes flicked over him. Hoodie, jeans, nothing fancy, and she let out a sigh so loud it could have rattled the mugs on a shelf. I'm busy, she muttered, not even trying to hide the annoyance. Go wait like everyone else. Then she went right back to her phone, thumbs tapping away. James blinked, stunned. For a split second, he wondered if he'd heard her right. Busy? The counter was clear, the rush was dying down, and here she was brushing him off like he was some nobody. He stepped back, folding his arms, and watched her from the corner of his eye. She tucked her phone away eventually, but only when it suited her. And that's when he saw it, the pattern. A white guy in a business suit stepped up next. Debbie straightened, flashed a toothy grin, and chirped, Hey there, what can I get started for you? She took his order, medium latte, extra foam, with a laugh and a nod, handing it over quick. Then a young black woman approached, clutching a crumpled $5 bill. Debbie's smile vanished. What do you want? She snapped, barely looking at her. The woman hesitated, asked for small coffee, and Debbie practically tossed it across the counter without a word. No warmth, no respect. James felt his stomach tighten. He'd seen enough to know this wasn't a one-off. He moved back in a line, determined to test her again. When it was his turn, he stepped up, keeping his tone even. Hi, I'd like a medium latte, please. Debbie didn't look up. We're out, she said flatly, like she was reading a script. He frowned. Are you sure? I just saw you make one. Her head snapped up then, and she fixed him with a glare that could have curdled cream. Try another store, she shot back, crossing her arms. The air between them crackled with tension, and for a moment, the whole shop seemed to hush. James held her gaze, his calm unshaken, but inside his mind was racing. This wasn't just rudeness. This was something uglier, something that struck at the heart of everything he'd built. He nodded once, slow and deliberate, then turned and walked out. The door chime jingled again as he stepped into the cold March air, his breath fogging in front of him. He didn't say a word about who he was. Didn't pull rank. Not yet. But as he headed to his car, parked a block away, a fire was kindling in his chest. Disbelief, disappointment, anger. How many others had walked out of his shop feeling like that? How many had been dismissed, ignored, made to feel less than because of someone like Debbie? James slid into the driver's seat and stared out the windshield, the city skyline blurring into the distance. Golden Brew wasn't just a business to him. It was a promise, a place where everyone, no matter who they were, could feel at home. He'd grown up in a world where doors slammed shut in his face too many times, and he'd sworn his company would be different. Now, standing on the other side of that counter, he'd felt that old sting again, and it hurt worse knowing it came from his own people. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, jaw tight. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He could have stormed back in, ripped off the hoodie, and fired Debbie on the spot. But that wouldn't fix it. Not really. One bad apple didn't mean much unless the tree was rotting. Was this just Debbie, or was there something bigger going wrong? He needed answers, and he wasn't going to stop until he had them. As he started the engine, a question gnawed at him, sharp and insistent. How deep did this go? Was his dream slipping away, one rude barista at a time? He didn't know yet, but he was damn sure going to find out. Hey, if you're wondering what happens next, James's voice seemed to echo in the car. Though he was alone, stick around. Hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss it. I got a feeling this story's just getting started. James Carter didn't drive straight home after leaving Golden Brew that morning. The sting of Debbie Miller's words, "Try another store," looped in his head like a bad song, and he couldn't shake the sour taste it left. He pulled his car into a quiet parking lot a few blocks away, cut the engine, and sat there, staring at the dashboard. 30 years he'd poured into this company. 30 years of late nights, handshake deals, and a stubborn belief that a coffee shop could be more than just a place to grab a drink. It was supposed to be a haven. And now he wasn't so sure. He tugged the hoodie off, tossing it onto the passenger seat, and ran a hand over his face. The plan had been simple. Walk in, order a coffee, see how his people treated a stranger. But what he'd seen wasn't just a lazy barista having an off day. It was a crack in the foundation, a crack he couldn't ignore. Debbie's attitude wasn't random. She'd been warm as sunshine to some customers and cold as a Chicago winter to others, and the difference wasn't hard to spot. It was skin deep. James felt his jaw tighten. He'd built Golden Brew to bury that kind of nonsense, not to let it fester behind his counters. He needed more than a hunch, though. One visit wasn't enough to call a pattern. So he made a decision right there in the car. He'd go back. Not as the CEO, not yet, but as the same nobody in a hoodie. He'd watch. He'd listen. And if Debbie was the problem he thought she was, he'd catch her red-handed. The next day, James was back at the same Golden Brew branch, hood up, blending into the lunchtime crowd. The line was shorter this time, but the energy was the same, busy, loud, alive. He kept his distance, leaning against a wall near the pickup counter, pretending to check his phone. His eyes, though, were locked on Debbie. She was behind the register again, phone nowhere in sight this time, but her hands moved slow, like she was doing the bare minimum to get by. A white woman in her 40s stepped up, all smiles, and Debbie matched her energy. "Hey, good to see you again," she chirped, punching in the order, a cappuccino, with a grin. "I'll have it right up for you." The woman laughed, said something about the weather, and Debbie nodded along like they were old pals. Then came a black guy, maybe 30, in a delivery uniform. He looked tired, like he'd been on his feet all day. "Small black coffee," he said, voice low. Debbie's smile dropped like a curtain. "Yeah, sure," she muttered, barely glancing at him. She slid the cup across the counter without a word, already turning away before he could even say thanks. James's fingers tightened around his phone. There was again, night and day. He stayed for an hour, nursing a plain coffee he'd grabbed from another barista, a kid named Sam Jackson, who'd smiled and called him sir without a hint of attitude. Sam was young, maybe 22, with quick hands and a quiet energy that reminded James of himself at that age. But Debbie? She was the storm cloud in the room. He watched her brush off an older Latino woman asking for sugar, saw her roll her eyes at a black teenager fumbling with change. Every time, the same split, warm for some, ice for others. It wasn't sloppy service. It was deliberate. Things got worse when an elderly man shuffled up to the counter. He was white, maybe 70, with a cane and a shaky voice. "Can I get a small coffee with cream?" he asked, taking his time to dig coins out of a worn wallet. Debbie sighed loud enough for the whole shop to hear. "Come on, Grandpa. Let's move it," she snapped, tapping her foot. The old man flinched, coins slipping from his fingers onto the counter. "Sorry," he mumbled, fumbling to pick them up. Debbie didn't help. She just stood there, arms crossed, until he finally slid the money over. She shoved the coffee at him and turned away, muttering something under her breath. James felt his blood heat up. That was it, the line crossed. He'd seen rudeness yesterday, but this was cruelty. He wanted to step in, say something, anything, but he held back. Not yet, he told himself. He needed the full picture. Still, the question burned. What was he going to do about this? Debbie wasn't just a bad hire. She was a threat, a walking, talking betrayal of everything Golden Brew stood for. He'd dreamed of a place where people like that old man, or the delivery guy, or even himself in his hoodie, could walk in and feel respected. Debbie was tearing that dream apart, one customer at a time. He finished his coffee and slipped outside, needing air. The cold bit at his face, but it didn't cool the frustration simmering inside. As he paced the sidewalk, he spotted Sam, the young barista, stepping out for a break. Sam lit a cigarette, took a drag, and noticed James standing there. "Hey, you okay, man?" Sam asked, his voice easy, friendly. James nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just thinking. You work here long?" "6 months, Sam said, blowing out smoke. "It's a good gig. Most folks are cool. Pays decent." He hesitated, then added, "Some days are rougher than others, though." James raised an eyebrow. "Rough how?" Sam shrugged, glancing back at the shop. "You know, people get busy, tempers flare. Customers can be a lot." And, he trailed off, like he wasn't sure how much to say. "Some of the staff don't make it easier." "Like who?" James pressed, keeping his tone casual. Sam took another drag, then flicked the cigarette away. "Look, I don't like talking trash. Let's just say not everyone's here for the same reasons I am. I want to learn, move up. Others? They're just clocking in." He grinned, a little sheepish. "Guess that's life, right?" James chuckled, but his mind was racing. Sam was a bright spot, a kid who got it, who cared. Talking to him felt like a breath of fresh air after Debbie's poison. It reminded James why he'd started Golden Brew in the first place, to give people like Sam a shot, to build something real. But Debbie? She was the opposite. She wasn't just clocking in. She was dragging the whole place down. He thanked Sam and headed back to his car, the weight of the day settling on his shoulders. Debbie was the problem, no doubt about it. But how far did it go? Was she a lone wolf? Or was the rot deeper? He couldn't shake the image of that old man, fumbling with his coins, or the delivery guy staring at his coffee like he'd been slapped. This wasn't what he'd signed up for. Not even close. As he slid into the driver's seat, a new question hit him, sharp and urgent. What was James going to do when he saw this kind of ugliness again? Because he knew, deep down, he hadn't seen the last of it. James Carter couldn't sleep that night. He lay in his downtown Chicago apartment, the city lights flickering through the blinds, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. The day's events at Golden Brew played on repeat in his mind. Debbie's sneer, the old man's trembling hands, Sam's quiet hope. He'd gone in expecting maybe a few hiccups, some sloppy service he could fix with a stern memo. But this was a gut punch. He rolled over, staring at the ceiling, and made a call. Tomorrow, he'd dig deeper. This wasn't about one bad barista anymore. This was about the soul of his company. The next morning, James sat at his desk in the Golden Brew headquarters, a sleek office overlooking Lake Michigan. No hoodie today, just a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up, and a cup of black coffee steaming beside him. He pulled up the company's internal system on his laptop, diving into the customer feedback log for the branch he'd visited. What he found hit him like a freight train. Complaint after complaint, stretching back months. Rude blonde cashier. Felt ignored because of my race. Staff snapped at me for no reason. One review stuck out. A woman wrote she'd stopped going because the blonde girl made my mom cry. James leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. How had this gone unnoticed? He cross-checked the employee records next. Debbie Miller had been at the branch for 2 years. Long enough to settle in, too long to still be this sloppy. Then he looked at Linda Hayes, the store manager. No disciplinary reports filed. No write-ups on Debbie. Nothing. James frowned. Linda was supposed to be his eyes and ears out there. If she'd seen this, and how could she not? Why hadn't she done something? He picked up the phone and dialed her direct line. "Linda, it's James Carter," he said when she answered, keeping his tone even. "Need you to come by the office today. 1 o'clock work for you?" She hesitated, her voice tight. Sure, Mr. Carter. Everything okay? Just need to talk. See you then." He hung up, staring out the lake. This was the turning point, the moment he realized the problem wasn't just Debbie. It was the system he'd trusted to catch her. Linda showed up right on time, her brown hair pulled back in a nervous ponytail, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her bag. She sat across from him, eyes darting around the office like she was waiting for a trap to spring. "Linda," James started, leaning forward, "I was at your store this week. Undercover. Saw some things that didn't sit right. You got any idea what I'm talking about?" Her face went pale, but she nodded. "Debbie," she said quietly. "I've seen how she acts. The attitude, the way she treats people. So why is she still there?" James asked, voice steady but firm. "I've got complaints going back months. Nothing from you. What's going on?" Linda swallowed hard, her fingers twisting the strap tighter. "I tried talking to her once early on. She laughed it off, said I was overreacting. Then she started pushing back. Said if I wrote her up, she'd quit, and half the staff would walk with her. She's tight with them. Popular, you know. I didn't want to lose the team. Things were busy, and..." She trailed off, eyes dropping to the floor. "I thought it'd get better on its own." James listened, his expression unreadable. Inside, though, a storm was brewing. He'd spent decades building a company where people mattered. Customers, staff, everyone. He'd handpicked managers like Linda to carry that torch. And here she was, admitting she'd let Debbie run the show because she was scared of a little pushback. He saw his own failure in that, too. He'd trusted too much, checked in too little. Golden Brew wasn't just his dream. It was his responsibility. And he'd let it slip. "Thanks for being honest," he said finally, his voice softer now. "But letting this slide? That's not an option. We're fixing it, starting now. You with me?" Linda nodded, a flicker of relief in her eyes. "Yes, sir. I'm with you." He sent her back to the store with a promise to follow up. But as the door clicked shut, James sat alone, the weight of it all sinking in. He'd been so proud of what he'd built. 30 years of grit and grind, turning a tiny shop into a name people trusted. But pride had blinded him. He'd assumed the values he'd preached, equality, respect, service, had trickled down. Now he saw the truth. They hadn't. Not everywhere. And that failure? It was on him. Could he fix this before it spread? Could he pull Golden Brew back from the edge? He wasn't sure, and that scared him more than anything. The crisis hit the next day. James was still at headquarters, mapping out a plan, new training, tighter oversight, when his phone buzzed. It was Linda again, her voice shaking. "Mr. Carter, I just found out something. Debbie's been talking to the staff. She told them if I crack down, it's because corporate's out to get them. She's got half the team ready to walk out tomorrow. I don't know what to do." James felt the air leave the room. This was the twist he hadn't seen coming. Debbie wasn't just a bad apple. She was a spark, and Linda's hesitation had let her light a fire. If the staff walked, that branch would collapse. Word would spread, customers would hear, social media would catch wind, and Golden Brew's name would take a hit. He could see the headlines now. Coffee chain implodes over toxic staff. All because he'd let one person poison the well. He stood up, pacing the office, his mind racing. He could fire Debbie today, shut down fast. But if the team followed through on her threat, he'd lose more than one barista. He'd lose the store. And if this was happening here, what about the other branches? Was this the tip of something bigger, something he'd missed all along? The stakes weren't just about one shop anymore. They were about everything he'd built. 30 years of sweat and sacrifice, teetering on the edge of ruin. That night, James sat in his car outside the Golden Brew branch, watching the lights flicker off as the last shift ended. He hadn't gone in, hadn't confronted anyone. Not yet. He just sat there, the darkness closing in, picturing the worst. Customers walking away for good. Empty tables. His dream, his legacy, crumbling because he'd failed to see the rot. Debbie's face flashed in his mind, her smug grin, her careless shrug. Then the old man with his coins. The delivery guy. All the people he'd let down. Was this it? Was this where Golden Brew fell apart? He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, and whispered to himself, "Have I already lost it all?" James Carter didn't sleep much that night either, but by the time the sun peaked over Chicago's skyline on March 8, 2025, something had shifted. He sat in his car outside the Golden Brew branch, the engine off, the quiet pressing in. Last night, he'd been drowning in doubt, picturing empty shops, a legacy in ruins. But as the first light hit the windshield, he felt a spark. This wasn't over. Not yet. He'd built Golden Brew from nothing once before, fought bigger battles than this. Debbie Miller wasn't going to take it down. Neither was his own fear. He straightened up, jaw set. Time to stop watching and start acting. Back at headquarters that morning, James moved fast. He called Linda Hayes into his office again, this time with a plan. "We're not losing that store," he told her, his voice steady as steel. "Debbie's out today. No negotiation. But we're not stopping there. You're getting training, real training, on how to lead, not just manage. I'll be there with you. We're turning this around." Linda's eyes widened, but she nodded, a flicker of grit showing through her nerves. James saw it and knew she could step up if he gave her the tools. He spent the next few hours laying it out. New oversight protocols, a staff meeting at the branch, and a company-wide push he'd been mulling over since the complaints piled up. This wasn't just about one shop anymore. It was about every Golden Brew door in Chicago. By noon, James stood in front of the branch's staff. No hoodie this time, just a sharp navy suit, his presence filling the room. The team gathered in the seating area, a mix of curious and uneasy faces staring back. Debbie leaned against the counter, arms crossed, her blonde hair pulled back tight. She didn't know what was coming. Neither did the others. Sam Jackson, the young barista, stood near the back, watching with wide eyes. Customers lingered at tables, sipping coffee, sensing something big. "Can I have your attention?" James said, his voice cutting through the hum. "My name's James Carter. I'm the CEO of Golden Brew." Gasps rippled through the room. Debbie's arms dropped, her face going white. "Last week, I came in here undercover. Wanted to see how this place runs when no one's looking. What I saw, it wasn't right." He locked eyes with Debbie, calm but unyielding. "I was ignored, lied to, watched customers get treated like dirt, some more than others. And for what I've dug up, it's been going on a while." He pulled a stack of printed complaints from his jacket, holding them up. "These are yours, Debbie. People saying they felt small, unwelcome, because of you. That stops now," Debbie stammered, stepping forward. "I didn't know it was you. I'd never." James raised a hand, cutting her off. "Doesn't matter who I am. Every person through that door deserves respect. You didn't give it. You're done here. Pack your things." The room went dead silent. Debbie blinked, mouth open, then tried again. "Wait, I can change." "No," James said, final as a slammed door. "You had your shot. Effective immediately, you're out." She stood there, frozen, then grabbed her bag and stormed out, the door slamming behind her. A few staff exchanged glances, but no one followed. The walkout she'd threatened? It didn't happen. James had called her bluff, and it held. He turned to the team, softening his tone. "This isn't just about her. Golden Brew's built on a promise. Everyone's welcome here. That's not negotiable. Starting today, we're doing mandatory training across every store. Diversity, respect, service. We're not waiting for problems. We're fixing them before they start. Linda's leading this branch, and I'm backing her up. Any questions?" Sam raised a hand, tentative. "Mr. Carter, does this mean we're all getting a fresh start?" James smiled, the first real one in days. "Yes, Sam. You bet." The tension broke, and the staff dispersed, buzzing with whispers. But the real twist came later that afternoon. A customer who'd been there, a gray-haired woman with a smartphone, had recorded the whole thing. By evening, the video was online. Black CEO fires rude barista on the spot. It spread like wildfire. Thousands of views, then tens of thousands. Comments poured in. "Finally, someone standing up for what's right. Golden Brew's got my business for life." James saw it on his phone that night and shook his head, a wry grin tugging at his lips. He hadn't planned on going viral, but he wasn't about to waste it. The next week, Golden Brew rolled out the changes. Training sessions kicked off. Linda stepped up with new confidence, and customers noticed. The branch that had been a powder keg a few days ago started humming again. Lines out the door, smiles back on faces. Sales ticked up, not just there, but across the city. People came in talking about the video, saying they'd heard Golden Brew was the real deal. James walked into that same shop a month later, no disguise, just a regular visit. The air felt different, lighter, warmer. He ordered a medium latte, and the barista, Sam, grinned as he handed it over. "On the house, Mr. Carter. Thanks for what you did." James took the cup, the weight of it grounding him. That first day, the hoodie, Debbie's sneer, the sting of it all, felt like a lifetime ago. He'd been a stranger then, testing his own dream. Now he stood here, not just the CEO, but the guy who'd fought to keep that dream alive. He sipped the coffee, letting the heat settle in his chest. It wasn't perfect yet. There'd be more battles. But this was a win. A few days later, James ran into Sam again at another branch. The kid was behind the counter, working fast, a new spark in his step. "Mr. Carter," Sam called out, waving him over. "You're why I stuck with this job. Seeing you that day, it meant something." James paused, touched. "Keep that fire, Sam. It'll take you far." They talked for an hour about coffee, life, leadership. As James left, he glanced back at the shop, the Golden Brew logo glowing above the door. It wasn't just a business anymore. It was a statement, a promise kept. And maybe, he thought, that's what mattered most. What would you do to protect what you believe in? He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing. He'd keep fighting for his. Hey, thanks for sticking with this story. James's voice seemed to linger in the air as he walked away. If it hit you like it hit me, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment. Let's keep these kinds of tales alive together.